Madam President, at the outset, I would like to congratulate on your election as the President of the Human Rights Council and wish you every success in your endeavors. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the organization that was created in the wake of the World War II with the aim to save future generations from the scourge of war and reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. Yet, 75 years later, we face wide spectra of existential challenges. In today's turbulent world, it is our responsibility to stand firmly against injustice and jointly work towards sustainable and better future. The deteriorated human rights situation in different parts of the world remain great concern for international community and require Council's constant attention. We still see and feel the dire consequences of the brutal armed conflict in Syria, where civilians continue to bear the brunt of the ongoing hostilities. We also see the struggle of courageous Venezuelan people for democracy and freedom, and Georgia reaffirms support to the efforts in achieving peaceful democratic transition. Madam President, the Human Rights Council has an immense role to play in addressing global challenges and delivering on the promise to leave no one behind. Therefore, efforts to increase the efficiency of the Council are something we should always aspire to. We agree with the President that more work has to be done in order to raise awareness about the Council. We also acknowledge the role of public diplomacy in this regard and join the call of the President for the human rights bodies to work harder to identify good stories of real people that have benefited from the enormous work of the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms. The Good Human Rights Stories initiative is a good example of promoting positive narrative on human rights, and Georgia is pleased to be its member. Distinguished delegates, the priorities we have set for our ongoing presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe echo those of councils: human rights and environmental protection, civil participation in decision-making process, child-friendly justice, and strengthening democracy through education, culture, and youth engagement. We will continue seeking the avenues for further cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights and the Special Procedures. We uphold the universality of UPR, one of the key mechanisms of the UN human rights machinery, and continue to be engaged in the review process through constructive participation. Georgia submitted its midterm report last March, and we look forward to our third UPR cycle review this November. Madam President, we remain deeply convinced of the value of civil society's participation in the work of the Council and its mechanisms. We greatly value the vital role of human rights defenders and regret that they continue to be subject of intimidation and reprisals. We also believe that the effectiveness of the Council's work depends on universal participation of all UN member states. Therefore, we continue to support the participation of least developed countries and small island developing states in this work. Distinguished delegates, advancing the human rights protection framework remains the top priority of my government. In this spirit of the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, this year, Georgia remains vocal in advancing gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. In this regard, we are pleased to have an opportunity of sharing our experience in fighting child early forced marriages within the Good Human Rights Stories initiative event here in Geneva today. Georgia attaches particular importance to the protection of human rights of women and girls affected by conflicts and in humanitarian settings, and in this regard, we actively take part in relevant initiatives. Excellencies, each year, the Human Rights Council adopts important thematic and country-specific resolutions, including annual resolution on cooperation with Georgia, focusing on the human rights and humanitarian situation in Georgia's Abkhazia and Ცხინვალის regions. Despite direct calls of the Human Rights Resolution and repeated efforts of the High Commissioners, so far the office has not been able to enter occupied Georgian regions, where the human rights and humanitarian situation on the ground is continuously deteriorating, with fundamental rights of ethnic Georgians being violated on a daily basis. Against the backdrop of intensified ethnic discrimination, violation of rights to life, deprivation of liberty, arbitrary detentions and kidnappings, infringement of right to property, violations of the right to health, restrictions on education in native language in both Georgian regions, the local population is deprived of minimal safeguards for their lives. The recent decision of the occupation regime to start removing and prohibit the sale of Georgian-produced and Georgian-labeled medicines in Ცხინვალის region represents further assault on the right to health and endangers lives of the local population. Sustained practice of installation of barbed wire and razor wire fences and multiple artificial obstacles on the Georgian territory, as well as regular closure of the so-called crossing points along the occupation line, continued to have severe implications on freedom of movement, further exacerbating humanitarian conditions on the ground, even resulting in fatal cases. The vivid example of continued practice of restriction of freedom of movement and illegal detentions was the case of the famous Georgian physician, Vaja Gaprindashvili, who was held in illegal detainment for almost 2 months for the so-called violation of state border. I would like to use this opportunity to thank all our international partners and organizations for their efforts that led to his release. Distinguished delegates, let me remind the Council that the cases of deprivation of lives of Georgian citizens in occupied regions has become a dangerous tendency. On March 10th last year, the Georgian citizen, Irakli Kvarashelia, was illegally detained by Russian FSB forces at the occupied line and later died. What is even more alarming, in the Russian military base illegally deployed in the occupied Abkhazia. David Basharuli, Giga Othozoria, Archil Tatunashvili are the names of those Georgians who had been deprived of their lives previous years. The most alarming is that perpetrators of these heinous crimes remain unpunished. Such kind of approach fuels the sense of impunity and furthermore encourages violence against ethnic Georgian population. Here, I would like to reiterate the importance of member states support the Othozoria Tatunashvili list as a preventive step to avoid further aggravation of situation through imposing the restrictive measures on the individuals responsible for human rights abuses in the occupied regions. Distinguished delegates, hundreds of thousands of IDPs and refugees expelled from the Abkhazia and Ცხინვალის region as a result of several waves of ethnic cleansing continue to be deprived of the rights to the safe and dignified return to their homes. Alarmingly, the deteriorated humanitarian and human rights situation in occupied regions poses an imminent threat of a new wave of forced displacement. We strongly believe that the absence of political solution cannot and should not be an obstacle to the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of those lacking the minimal safeguards and living under the imminent threat of expulsion. Therefore, resolute stance of international community, first of all the Human Rights Council, is essential. With this in mind, we are planning to retable a draft resolution on the cooperation with Georgia during the current session, and we count on your support. Distinguished delegates, the consequences of Russian occupation policy, be it in Georgia or Ukraine, cannot be addressed effectively without a strong international response. But the only way to generate positive changes on the ground is to start implementation of the commitments. The large-scale cyber attack by Russia against the websites and services of the Georgian government and private agencies last October is one of the dimensions of the ongoing hybrid type of warfare against Georgia, which goes against international norms and principles, undermines Georgia's sovereignty and democratic development. I am grateful to all partners in condemning this attack, which was targeted at Georgia's national security and was intended to harm Georgian citizens and government structures by disrupting and paralyzing the functionality of various organizations. I would like once again to call Russia to comply with commitments undertaken by the EU-mediated 2008 ceasefire agreement and halt its destabilizing activities in Georgia. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate Georgia's commitment to be actively engaged within the work of the Council for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe. I thank you.